International Energy Agency believes that China will reach its contribution from renewables to the energy production mix that were set for 2030 already in 2025. What does fiscal policy have to do with it? In the early stages, renewable energy was subsidized, but the success in bringing down costs was so strong that those subsidies are being phased out, which is exactly in line with what should be the case. So in the area of climate, fiscal policy is being used in China to accelerate the transition, and that type of use of fiscal policy will serve China well going forward. You ask about poverty, and that is a crucial priority. We believe that finance for development is crucial to tackle poverty. We believe that sustainable development goals require an overall approach to finance that includes poverty reduction, it includes health, it includes education, it includes, of course, climate change, and much else. And I believe that my colleague Paulo will also want to elaborate on that.
On the Eurozone and the fiscal rules, as Peter mentioned, we have been working with European authorities, but also in our research on thinking about what countries should do when they're rethinking the return to fiscal rules. So many countries around the world suspended the rules at the height of the COVID to give flexibility to react to the shocks. And now how to go back to the rules. Should they go back to the old rules or new rules? And what we stressed was 3 key pillars that countries should think when redesigning. One, have solid medium-term fiscal frameworks that allow some flexibility to shocks, but send a very clear signal and have a medium-term anchor towards debt sustainability and building buffers. Second, strengthen the part on assessment of risks, of fiscal risks. So the calibration of rules and the policies should be commensurate to the risks. So high risk countries with high debt vulnerabilities should have a more ambitious fiscal path. And the third point is really strengthen fiscal institutions. This includes transparency, fiscal transparency, and, for example, strengthen the role of fiscal councils. This will increase accountability in the framework and improve governance. Just one very quick on the poverty and on the food insecurity. I think this is absolutely a priority for countries, and they need to find a space to address these issues. And again, I repeat, for low-income countries, really tax revenues are very low, so this is really an area to strengthen, to improve the fiscal space to react to this. And also from the international community, working together to address some of these issues, including the conflicts that are undermining and exacerbating the food insecurity problems.
On oil prices, and the general message to countries is to reduce fuel subsidies in light of that. That's a quick way of achieving savings. On Egypt specifically, indeed, the goal is to reduce the debt ratio in the medium term, and the way to achieve that is to maintain primary surpluses above 5.5% of GDP. That's the objective, through more revenues and through reductions in spending that preserve support for the vulnerable.
So maybe very quickly on South Africa, yes, the problems on the energy sector and the electricity company have an effect on the budget and the debt through two ways. One, indirect, because they affect economic growth and they affect tax revenues. So that undermines the fiscal accounts. And direct, because the company requires government support, and that is reflected in our projections for the debt numbers. So the solution has to be to obviously address structurally the problems in the sector, which will contribute to higher growth and reduce the need for future government support.
So, Paolo said before, the inflation reading at 5% shows inflation well above target. And as you said, David, indicators of persistence point to a persistent process of inflation, and that validates the spring meeting's emphasis on the priority to inflation fighting for macroeconomic stability. I will not comment on monetary policy at all, but I think it's very important to emphasize the role that fiscal policy can have in easing the burden on monetary policy. By fiscal tightening, it's possible to moderate aggregate demand and ease the pressure on policy rates. And in the current circumstances, that is good not only for distributional reasons that are covered in the fiscal monitor, but also for financial stability reasons, be it domestic or global, which I believe, David, was the point that you were driving at. When it comes to the UK, the new budget in the UK includes two fiscal rules that apply with a 5-year delay. That's a limit on the deficit of 3% of GDP, and a constraint that states that public debt to GDP has to be falling by the end of the projection period, the 5-year period. And according to the UK's own Office for Budget Responsibility, these two rules are met narrowly at the relevant time frame. The numbers that we put out in the spring meetings are different from national numbers. The national numbers focus on the public sector, while we have the international comparable general government, and the years are not the same for the UK. The fiscal year applies, so it's 2027, 2028, while we use calendar years. We have not yet had the chance to go through the details, and so I cannot give you the details that you asked for, but we're actually quite impressed by the way the budgetary procedure, with an emphasis in the medium term, is working in the UK. And what you see in the UK is that you have an increase in public debt ratios for a couple of years, and then a stabilization of those public debt ratios, followed, if the governments and the OBR's forecasts prove correct, a decline in the public debt to GDP ratio. This path is fully reasonable as a way to managing public finance risks from a medium term perspective. Thank you.
All right, and that's it for the program today. Thank you all for joining us. I will see you all again. Be the best you can be the change that you want to see. I am Nancy Naji. Bye now.
In Ramadan, we are all connected. We all have the same empathy towards one another. We all feel the same rush to catch that moment of iftar and walk into the same special home-cooked meals. Every Ramadan, we are one when we fast, but not always when we break fast. This Ramadan, let's be one when sharing iftar. Sharing makes us one. Coca-Cola, real wonder.
Hello and welcome to Roadmap 2023, our election issues and personalities tracking program. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. Thanks for joining us. Even though my guest on today's edition was not physically present during this election season, the reports on the various issues of concern were predictable as the signs were there well before the season began, according to my guest. My guest also says the